Hi, thank you and good morning. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Lee and the organizing committee for graciously inviting me and Dr. Wee here to this event and for inviting us to be part of this Enterovirus network. Today I'm talking on behalf of me and Dr. Wee here because I think the two of us when Dr. Wee was stationed as a pediatrician in Cebu Hospital, and a lot of the data I'm going to describe today is from that hospital. We have been working with him, his hospital, and our lab for now coming to 20 years already. So we have seen all the outbreaks since it was first noted in 1997 until now. A little bit more about what is HFMD. I think Prof. Sam already showed a bit about it. Just for some general knowledge of what causes HFMD, they are all caused by viruses from the Enterovirus genus. Currently, there are 7 species of Enterovirus genus that cause HFMD. You have the Enterovirus from A to B and Rhinovirus A to C. They all affect humans. And HFMD generally or predominantly are caused by viruses from the species A type. These are some of the types that have been isolated, associated with HFMD. And if you have not seen an electron microgram picture of the virus, that's how it looks like. This is the genome of the virus or of an enterovirus in general. You have a structural region, the P1 region, that codes for 4 different proteins that form the structure of the virus. Then you have 2 regions that code for non-structural proteins. You have a 3' untranslated region and a 5' untranslated region. It's important to note with the 5' untranslated region, people suspect that mutations in that region affects the folding of that region, which in fact may play a role in the infectivity of this virus. A lot of the molecular epidemiological investigations are generally done with sequences from the BP1 protein or gene, because it's the predominant protein in the capsid of this virus. So our story really begins in 1997. It was when we saw a huge outbreak of hand, foot, and mouth disease. We had more than 10,000 cases at that point. Was extensively reported in the newspaper, particularly because 20 over, or close to 30 infant deaths also were associated during this outbreak. Some of the newspaper articles. Then, but I'll have to say that investigations since have shown that this story may be a little bit complicated with regards to the deaths, because a then unidentified adenovirus, which our lab was investigating, was found to be present on the majority of these fatal children. Later, this was identified as a novel adenovirus type 21, which for many years, almost 2 decades, never resurfaced anywhere in this world, but recently surfaced in Germany, associated with respiratory syndromes, both in adults and children. And I think retrospectively, it would be interesting if we could really find the case notes for all the 97 outbreaks to see the respiratory connection syndrome with this outbreak and see whether we can sort out which ones were adenovirus associated and which ones were EV71 associated. So a lot of the deaths occurred in Sarawak, and for most of these deaths we actually didn't or were not able to show an EV71 from sterilized sites, but we could find an adenovirus. Nonetheless, a lot of the children from the 97 outbreak had CNS involvement, and a lot of them were hospitalized. So it was a nasty outbreak. I think Taiwan followed us the following year and reported a very nasty outbreak in 98. And since then, you have the whole Asia-Pacific region and China reporting huge amounts of HFMD outbreaks associated with EV71, recording several thousand deaths in total and many more CNS cases. So today I'm going to talk about the molecular epidemiological surveillance of EV71 in Sarawak over this period of time. Now I have to note that this does not represent a national surveillance study. It's purely a research-based surveillance study. I think in Sarawak in particular, the Institute Virology lab where I'm attached to is probably the only molecular biology lab that can perform such kinds of work in Sarawak. And also it's important to note that where Jamal lives, and actually I'm from Peninsular Malaysia also, but working in Sarawak, and where Sarawak is two separate land masses, right? So although we are both Malaysians and from Malaysia, what happens in Peninsular Malaysia may not necessarily represent what happens in Sarawak. It's quite different because we are part of the Borneo Island landmass, and Peninsular Malaysia is linked to Thailand, and it's a different landmass altogether. So often what happens in Peninsular Malaysia is not the same as what happens in Sarawak, not only for HFMD, but for other diseases also. And so that's why when we report, if you read publications that we publish, we tend to put Sarawak, Malaysia, just to differentiate, as opposed to Peninsular Malaysia. So these are studies done at my lab, looking at the molecular epidemiology of EV71. And since the 1997 outbreak, in 1998, we initiated together with the Public Health Department of the state of Sarawak to form sort of like a surveillance study for HFMD, a laboratory-based surveillance study. So what happens is we set up 3 centers, one in the south of Sarawak. So this is Sarawak, all the way up there. The whole thing is Borneo. Malaysia has 2 states in this island of Borneo. This is Sarawak, very long. I think the total land mass of Sarawak almost equals that of the whole of Peninsular Malaysia. And then you have the state of Sabah in the north. So these are 2 separate states in Malaysia. You have Brunei encapsulated here. And this is Kalimantan, Indonesia. So the capital of Sarawak is here, Kuching. We are the southern tip. Dr. Ui used to work here, now he's here. So a lot of the data is actually going to come from here in this presentation. So in 1998, we set up 3 major surveillance sites centered on the major public hospitals in the south, central, and northern regions of Sarawak. So Kuching General Hospital, Sibu General Hospital, that actually serves the greater basin of Sarawak here, and then Miri General Hospital in Miri. Besides this also, we have outpatient clinics, whether public or private, that also contributed to this surveillance study. So just a snapshot, data up to 2015 in this case, we see similar to what Prof. Jamal has mentioned, we see 3-year cyclical outbreaks of EV71. So in 97, we saw an outbreak in 2000, 2003, 2006, then 2008/9, 2011/12. And since then, we've not really seen any EV71 up to this point. Now, molecular taxonomy for EB71 originates from this paper by Brown from the US CDC, in which they proposed 3 genogroups. And since that initial publication, we now know we have 3 subgenotypes of Bs and Cs. And in the Sarawak story, from 1997 to 2003, having 3 outbreaks, we saw a new subgenogroup of the B type in each subsequent outbreak. So it was B3 here in 1997, it was a B4 in 2000, and in 2003, subsequently we only saw a B5. After 2003, we have only ever seen B5, but there are subtle differences in the B5s that we have seen. Now, if you look here, the one in purple, this was the 2003. So there was a predominant cluster of B5s in 2003, but because we did quite a fair bit of sequencing, we saw what we determined then as outbreak variants of the B5 that didn't cluster with the dominant group at that point. But looking at subsequent outbreaks, in 2003 was a very special year. We had 3 separate genetic clusters of B5, or we call them clusters, or we call them lineages. One over here, here, and here, and we had a few fatal cases in 2006, but they were all associated with only one of the 3 clusters. And there was a correlation between geographical distribution and the timing of these different clusters. One of these clusters predominated throughout the outbreak. One came and went very fast. The other came later but was associated with CNS involvement, but not with deaths. So that was interesting. And then in 2009, we saw a separate large cluster or lineage of a B5, different from what we have previously seen. But again, we get this picture, which is part of what interests me for this. We start to see outbreak, what you call it, outgroup variants of a small segment of these lineages that in this case appear to be similar to outgroup strains that we initially saw in 2003, which means to suggest that these insignificant, I put it in inverted commas, that are not part of the major outbreak strain of a particular outbreak in preceding years, don't actually go away altogether. We see them in future outbreaks. They still reappear. And that's a point we'll talk about a bit further later on. And then in 2011 and 12, we see the same thing again. We see a totally different separate cluster of the predominant outbreak strain of the B5. But again, we start to see a small population of outgroup strains that appear to be similar to earlier outbreaks. Now, what about the Cs? Sarawak has never seen a genotype C major outbreak. We have seen sporadic C1 strains being isolated, particularly in the 2000 outbreak, where the predominant outbreak strain was the B4, and then in 2003, where the dominant outbreak strain was the B5, which we first saw the B5. Well, we started to see C1s then, and we thought it was going to be a C1 outbreak, but it was very quickly replaced by what we now know as a B5. This is just to show a similar representation and how the B5 outcompeted the C1 in the 2003 outbreak. And this is a story that may interest you and probably worthy of more investigation. So we see more than one B5 lineage, even though we are seeing the same subgenotype since 2003, but there are differences. We see different lineages of B5. So again, just to reinforce the point, in 2003 we saw two separate lineages. In 2006 it was rather dramatic, three totally different lineages. 2009, same thing, 2012, 11. And genogroup B and C strains, we now know, and what we have heard from the previous discussions, a lot of the Cs tend to be in the northern hemisphere. You get them in China, and now we know in Cambodia, in Vietnam, and in Taiwan. The Bs tend to be in the southern hemisphere, Singapore, Malaysia, Sarawak, even in Australia. Although Australia seems to import them from all over the place. So Australia has seen C outbreaks and B outbreaks. But today there are more than three of the original genogroups of EV71. We have the single D genogroup, the first different genogroup besides the ABC that was first described in India. Now we see from Africa, we've got E and F. A little bit about the distribution of the different unique genogroups of EV71s associated around the world. I think in Europe, you have a lot of C1s, but they don't tend to cause nasty clinical syndromes. A lot of them are asymptomatic. You have the D there and the new E and Fs over here. What about control of enterovirus in Sarawak? So, Prof. Sam has mentioned to you the Ministry of Health guidelines. So, for all hospitals and clinics, even in Sarawak, we are bound by those guidelines and we follow those guidelines. As was mentioned, we have mandatory notification when you see a HFMD case. There's closure of childcare centers and kindergartens. Well, although now, as Dr. Lee has correctly pointed out, Singapore is considering whether there's any benefit in closing this, because the economic impact of closures of nurseries is quite high. Actually, there's a cascading effect when parents have to stay at home and take care of their kids instead of sending them at the nursery. So I think it's a valid point. I personally think they shouldn't shut it down, right? Just let the sick kids stay at home. I think from the earlier talks, I think Taiwan has a very good education system in terms of educating public about HFMD and taking the necessary steps, because it's a fecal oral route transmission. So basically, general personal hygiene will help to prevent the disease from becoming nasty. So I think education at the end of the day plays an important role. So what are the take-home messages from today's discussion? I've told you about the different outbreaks that we have seen. Currently, we are only seeing B5s. We see mixed lineages of B5s. And what roles do they play? Are they associated with disease severities? I've had some thoughts on that in some of the discussions I've had with Dr. Lee. But also, it opens up the question of where does the virus lie in between outbreaks. This data suggests that it doesn't really go away, it reappears. So it must lie in some reservoir somewhere. And to date, that's one of the open questions with EB71 and HFMD. Nobody really knows where the virus hides. So even the dominant virus strains from previous outbreaks continue to circulate in small numbers. You don't only see the variant outgroup strains continue to reappear in the future from previous outbreaks, but the dominant ones also continue to circulate in small numbers. So one thing it suggests is that there must be a low transmission of EBA71 strains over time, and that strains from previous outbreaks just sit somewhere and doesn't disappear altogether. So these are some of the important things probably that we might want to look at, because it will have implications, say, of vaccine development, the choice of strains to use for developing the vaccines and such. So with this, me and Dr. Wei thank both of you. I think both of us prepared this presentation. He elected me to present today, and he sits over there. So thank you once again for your kind attention.